Why do empires always collapse at their wealthiest moment? What if I told you that getting rich is exactly what kills them? The pattern is so consistent across history, it appears almost natural. Rome, Spain, Britain, the Soviet Union, every empire followed the same script. Peak wealth equals peak vulnerability. The same success that brought dominance brought destruction. And the mechanism is hiding in plain sight. Welcome to Economics of Power. For 2,000 years, historians observed the same paradox. Empires don't collapse during poverty, they collapse during prosperity. Edward Gibbon, writing in 1776, stated it plainly: the decline of Rome was the natural and inevitable effect of immoderate greatness. Prosperity ripened the principle of decay. He wasn't describing bad luck or barbarian strength, he was identifying a structural disease. Success creates obligations. Obligations demand resources. Resources get redirected from productive use to maintaining control. The system that created wealth becomes the system that destroys it. This isn't failure, it's the logic of imperial success, consuming itself. Rome reached its territorial maximum under Trajan around 117 AD, 5 million square kilometers, 300,000 troops stationed across distant frontiers. The empire had never been richer, more powerful, more completely dominant. It was also doomed. Why? Because maintaining that vast territory required resources that exceeded what the territory produced. Every new province demanded garrison troops, administrators, infrastructure, and military protection. The costs compounded faster than the revenues. Gibbon called this immoderate greatness. Modern historians call it imperial overstretch. Either way, the diagnosis is identical. Peak size equals peak vulnerability. The mechanism is straightforward but fatal. Empires expand to access resources: grain, silver, trade routes, labor. Expansion requires military force. Military forces must be maintained at the frontier. Frontier maintenance costs money. Money comes from taxation of conquered territories and the imperial core, but territories at maximum extent generate less revenue than they cost to defend. The empire faces a choice: contract and lose prestige, or maintain size and bankrupt the center. Neither option is acceptable. So empires choose a third path. They debase currency, increase taxation, and hope the problem resolves itself. It never does. Rome followed this script precisely. To fund legions defending the Rhine-Danube frontier and eastern defenses against Parthia, emperors debased currency. They reduced silver content in coins to mint more. Inflation exploded. Real wages collapsed. Tax burdens on Italy and Gaul became unsustainable. The core economy, the productive heart that funded the empire, weakened catastrophically. This created a vicious cycle. Weaker core meant less revenue meant more debasement meant more inflation. More inflation meant weaker core. The empire entered terminal decline not through defeat, but through the mathematics of imperial maintenance. Success had become structurally impossible to sustain. Yale historian Paul Kennedy documented this pattern across 5 centuries of great power competition. His 1987 book, The Rise and Fall of the Great Powers, identified the constant triple tension facing empires: investment, defense, and consumption. Empires must invest in productive economy, defend vast territories, and satisfy domestic consumption. Successfully balancing all three is simple to understand, but impossible to execute. As territories expand, defense costs rise faster than revenues. Resources shift from investment to military spending. Productive capacity stagnates. Economic growth slows. The empire's relative power declines even as absolute military strength appears intact. This is imperial overstretch, and it's killed every empire in history. Habsburg Spain provides the clearest example. After conquering the Americas, Spain became history's wealthiest empire. Gold and silver flowed from New World mines. The Spanish crown could afford the largest military in Europe. It funded wars across the continent simultaneously. And it went bankrupt 5 times between 1557 and 1647. How does the richest empire on earth go bankrupt? Simple. It spends more than it earns. Spain's military commitments, defending Netherlands, fighting France, suppressing German Protestants, maintaining Mediterranean fleets, exceeded even massive New World revenues. Debt service consumed 70% of crown income. The empire was credit addicted and inflexible. Prosperity created obligations that prosperity couldn't fund. Britain repeated the pattern 3 centuries later. The Victorian Empire was history's largest. 1/4 of Earth's land surface, 400 million people, unrivaled naval power, industrial supremacy, complete financial dominance, and terminal decline. Why? Imperial overstretch. Maintaining empire required defending trade routes worldwide, garrisoning India with British troops, projecting power into Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. The costs compounded. Meanwhile, Germany and America industrialized faster. By 1914, Britain's economy was smaller than either rival, but its commitments were vastly larger. World War I bankrupted the empire. Britain won militarily, but victory required borrowing massively from America. Financial hegemony transferred westward. Empire became unaffordable. This reveals something crucial about imperial decline. It's not primarily military, it's economic. Gibbon emphasized this constantly. Rome's legions remained effective long after the empire entered decline. Britain's Royal Navy dominated seas through both world wars. American military forces are currently the most powerful in history. Military strength persists even as economic foundations rot. This creates a deadly illusion. Leaders see military dominance and conclude the empire is strong. They don't see the productive base hollowing out. They don't recognize that military spending is consuming the economy that makes military power possible. The empire appears strong until suddenly it doesn't. Collapse comes not gradually, but catastrophically. The Soviet Union demonstrated this perfectly. By the 1980s, the USSR maintained military forces comparable to America's nuclear parity. Massive conventional armies, global presence from Cuba to Vietnam to Angola. But the economy was broken. Military spending consumed 25% of GDP. Investment in productive sectors was negligible. Consumer goods were scarce. Technology stagnated. The entire system existed to sustain military competition with the West, and it worked until it collapsed completely. 1991. No invasion, no defeat, just financial exhaustion. The USSR fell to imperial overstretch more completely than any empire destroyed by conquest. Military parity masked economic collapse until the mask could no longer hold. Kennedy's analysis suggested America faced identical dynamics. Writing in 1987, he argued the United States was overextended, global commitments exceeded economic capacity. Defense spending was squeezing productive investment. Relative decline was inevitable. Critics attacked him savagely. How dare he suggest American decline? Then the Soviet Union collapsed. America emerged as sole superpower. The unipolar moment. Kennedy appeared wrong. But he wasn't. He was early. Kennedy studied centuries, not years. Great power decline takes decades, sometimes centuries. The unipolar moment was brief. 20 years. China rose. American infrastructure decayed. Defense commitments expanded globally. The pattern Kennedy identified continued, just more slowly than critics expected. Understanding imperial decline clarifies seemingly contradictory evidence. Why does military dominance coincide with economic weakness? Because military dominance requires resources that could otherwise fund productive investment. Every dollar spent on aircraft carriers doesn't fund infrastructure. Every soldier stationed abroad doesn't produce exportable goods. Military spending has economic consequences. It provides security, but security isn't growth. And empires maintaining global security networks sacrifice growth for stability. Initially, this works. American military dominance enabled the dollar's reserve currency status. But maintaining dominance costs more every year. Rivals don't need global presence. They invest in productivity while America pays for global order. The gap narrows. Overstretch accelerates. Gibbon identified another fatal dynamic. Prosperity corrupts civic virtue. When Rome was poor and struggling, citizens fought for the Republic. Civic duty meant personal sacrifice for collective survival. As Rome became wealthy, citizenship meant receiving benefits without contributing sacrifice. Legions filled with mercenaries, not citizens. Political leadership prioritized personal wealth over public service. The connection between individual welfare and state strength dissolved. Gibbon wrote, "The long peace introduced a slow and secret poison into the vitals of the empire. The minds of men were reduced to the same level. The fire of genius was extinguished. Even the military spirit evaporated. Wealth created complacency. Complacency created vulnerability. Vulnerability created collapse." This isn't moral judgment. It's structural analysis. Wealthy societies lose the desperation that creates resilience. When survival is guaranteed, sacrifice seems irrational. When material comfort is abundant, risking comfort for abstract ideals appears foolish. But empires require sacrifice. They require citizens willing to defend borders, leaders willing to make unpopular decisions, populations willing to endure hardship for long-term security. Prosperity makes all of this psychologically harder. Why sacrifice when comfort is available? Why risk when security seems permanent? The empire that wealth built becomes unable to sustain the effort wealth required. This is the internal poison Gibbon identified. and it's killed every empire eventually. Modern empires face an additional complication: democracy. Imperial overstretch requires either raising taxes or cutting domestic spending to fund military commitments. Both are politically toxic in democracies. Voters demand more services, less taxation, and military dominance. Politicians promise all three simultaneously. The math doesn't work, so governments borrow. America's national debt exceeds $30 trillion. Japan's debt exceeds 200% of GDP. European nations average debt-to-GDP ratios above 80%. This debt finances current consumption and military spending by mortgaging future revenues. It's the same strategy Rome used through currency debasement, just more sophisticated, and probably more devastating in its ultimate consequences. The pattern is consistent enough to predict. Empires rise through productive economic growth that funds military expansion. Military expansion creates security and access to resources. Security and resources enable more growth. The cycle seems permanent. Then the empire reaches maximum extent. Maintaining maximum extent costs more than expansion did. New territories generate less revenue than their defense requires. Military spending increases while productive investment decreases. Relative economic power declines. The empire can't admit weakness, so it maintains commitments beyond its capacity. Debt accumulates. Infrastructure decays. Rivals close the power gap. The empire faces crisis and discovers it no longer has the resources to respond. Collapse follows, not immediately, but inevitably. Getting rich is how empires die, because prosperity creates the obligations that wealth can't sustain. Military dominance requires resources that could fund growth. Global commitments demand spending that exceeds revenues. Civic virtue erodes in comfort. Political systems prioritize consumption over investment. The productive base that created power atrophies under the weight of maintaining it. This isn't moral failure or bad leadership. It's structural logic. The same expansion that made empires great makes them unsustainable. The same success that brought wealth brings collapse. Every empire in history learned this. Most learned too late. Understanding this pattern doesn't prevent it, but it destroys the illusion that current power is permanent.